Hello, good evening, and many thanks for joining us on the news at 7 on AT International. Many thanks for having you. I'm Chimobi Walter Naji. First, let's take the headlines. Member countries of African Union begin intensify deliberations at silencing the guns for sustainable development on the continent. Nigeria and Canada resolve to deepen highly beneficial relations in critical sectors. Plus, 3 more members of Ansaro terror group arrested by mop-up operation by police operatives. Alright, we'll begin the news by telling you the heads of state and governments of the 55 member countries of the African Union have begun intensive deliberations aimed at silencing the guns towards creating conducive conditions for sustainable development on the continent. Now, this is in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, at the summit of the African Union, 33rd in its series. President Muhammadu Buhari is leading Nigeria's delegation to the event. State House correspondent Adamu Sambo reports.
Silencing the guns, creating conducive conditions for Africa's development is the African Union theme for the year 2020. The initiative is a flagship project of Africa's Agenda 2063, aimed at achieving a conflict-free Africa, preventing genocide, making peace a reality for all, and ridding the continent of wars as well as all forms of conflicts. Speakers at the event identified poverty, climate crisis, historical injustices, illicit financial flows and corruption, bad governance, and post-electoral disputes as some of the challenges that lead people to violent conflicts.
And by acting concretely on all these issues and their root causes, and by giving the necessary political, military, and diplomatic means, then we can silence the guns, and that is the only way we can win.
Ultimately, silencing the guns is not just about peace and security, but also about inclusive and sustainable development and human rights. I can guarantee the full support of the United Nations for this landmark initiative.
Highlights of the opening ceremony was the takeover of the chairmanship of the African Union by the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, from his Egyptian counterpart, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi.
As Africans living in this new era, we shoulder the greatest of all responsibilities to ensure that our wealth as a continent does not become our poverty, that our blessing does not become our curse, and that our endowment does not become our downfall.
Newly elected heads of state and government of Algeria, Botswana, Mauritius and Mauritania were formally introduced and welcomed to the African Union. During the summit, which continued behind closed doors, reports of the institutional reform of the African Union, Continental Free Trade Area, peace and security, as well as specific thematic issues will be received for consideration by the African leaders as they continue to enhance efforts at creating the Africa we want. From Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Adamu Sambo, NTA News.
Now, silencing the guns is an agenda of the African Union towards putting an end to war, terrorism and conflict on the continent. And this year's African Union Summit has already opened in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopia's capital, with heads of states and governments coming in from all over Africa, discussing ways of achieving the goal. And this report, Musa Baba Aliyu takes a look at the agenda and the commitment of the continental body to the report.
The sounds of guns are everywhere in Africa, occasioned by war, terrorism, conflict and other social vices. A recent report from the International Displacement Monitoring Center indicates that more than 12.5 million people are caught in the midst of crisis in 33 countries on the continent. The unimpressive use of the guns has pushed up trade of illegal arms in Africa, estimated at $1 billion.
Our resources that are devoted in purchase of arms, but the devastation that especially small arms and light weapons have brought on the continent, which hardly produces such weapons. And of course, the destructions the destruction around the continent, in many parts of the continent, relating to conflict, are such that without a concerted effort to silencing the guns, will continue to go around the circle.
Concerned over the situation on the continent, the African Union has set an agenda and timeline for putting an end to all wars, civil conflict, gender-based violence, and genocide on the continent this year. Silencing the guns and realizing a conflict-free Africa is one of the flagship projects of the African Union captured under the aspirations of Africa's Agenda 2063.
And if we move like that in a coordinated manner, working together, I think the results will continue to be visible and better.
Mechanisms being adopted in achieving the goals include conflict prevention, early warning, and management and post-conflict reconstruction.
Of the situation in Libya, which of course affects us greatly, especially with regards to small arms and light weapons that are proliferating in our part of the world, and so we're now trying to come up with a common strategy to address the situation.
The United Nations and the People's Republic of China have pledged to support the African leaders in silencing the guns and drums of war, just as Canada extends hands of support with $10 billion. Nigeria, Niger, Mali, Chad, and Burkina Faso are the countries combating terrorism, while Central African and South African nations face conflict as a result of struggle for power. Musa Baba Aliyu, NTA News.
Well, I've been joining in the studio for his line of thought and perspective to Agenda 2063 of the African Union is Dr. Hamisu Abdurrahman Abu, a political scientist and, of course, a Sahel security analyst. Doc, so much interface on silencing the guns in Africa, yet no respite. What do you make of this?
Thank you very much for that very particular important question. The problem with Africa is the fact that African leaders have never come together to evolve a strategy and they follow through with all the financials as well as the capacity to deploy. What has been happening is to evolve a policy and wait on the international community to finance such important and laudable programs that are supposed to impact the lives of Africans. And we've been advocating that Africa needs to be responsible and alive to its responsibilities. The persons or the group of persons or nations we are relying on are the same nations that are to some large extent responsible for the conflicts in Africa. Part of the historical legacies of colonialism has come to play a dominant role, and then the charism it has instituted is being deepened every day by the support for one faction or the other, either in electoral cycle or in the contestation for power, which dovetail into control for resources. The other thing again is that most of the weapons that are being used in the conflict are not even produced or manufactured in Africa. They are product of the same environment that is equally pledging support for African countries to overcome the menace of gun.
All right, Doc, with the issues, in the front at the 33rd Summit of the African Union, what should be the key, discussion at that summit?
You see, the problem with Africa is the fact that we've not really mainstreamed dialogue into conversations that has to do with struggle for power. The other issue again has to do with injustice. The third one has to do with perversion of institutions and processes. The stakes are too high in Africa because we are not really into production of those things that will make life a lot easy for people. Therefore, the contestation for power has always taken the front burners. And both those in the opposition and those in government are willing to sacrifice the motherland in the pursuit of their ambition, to the extent that they are ready to collaborate with external forces to tear the country apart. But if you understand the fact that all you need first to progress is peace, before you can talk about growth and development, then the first thing that we need to do is to be able to evolve a strategy of conversation that takes dialogue very seriously. There are two ways of reform. One is the peaceful means that has to do with speaking with one another or speaking to one another, as well as reaching consensus that should be implemented. The other strategy of radical change is through the violent means. In Africa, we've tested both, the longest of which is conflict, the use of violence. And this use of violence has led to a lot of devastation, to famine, to a lot of unpalatable outcome. So for me, as a continent that has had the longest fight using weapons that are not manufactured in this part of the world, I think we must have learned lessons that will push us towards dialogue. But it seems that we don't believe in dialogue.
Okay, Doc, in your earlier submissions, I mean, you made mention of the fact that a lot of these countries that are pledging support for Africa are the countries that are causing problems in Africa. We've seen Canada, for instance, has already shown some commitment in support for the EU's efforts. How should other world leaders react to this?
Well, it goes beyond donations. For sure, Canada is one of those countries that you could not point to any part of the world that Canada has colonized. But I'm talking about the broader context within which this crisis is taking place. The major powers that are contesting for space, for market, for resources, for trade routes are in fact the primary causal factor of some of the conflict we are witnessing in Africa. So when you are responsible in terms of providing logistic support as well as weapon, and you come on the open to make some pledges, it doesn't make sense, because these are two contradictory acts. So if there is any country that is interested in benefiting from Africa, such a country should be able to work together with Africa to ensure that there is peace, because without peace, people cannot work, and without work, people cannot earn pay, and whatever you are producing that you are sending to Africa may not find the desired market. So for me, the first thing that we need to do as African nations, we have to be alive to our responsibilities. We ought not to wait on anybody to be able to take initiatives that will lead to peace in our country.
All right, Doc, we thank you very much for being part of us on the news tonight. I've been speaking with Dr. Hamisu Abdul Rahman. Many thanks for being with us. And moving forward on the news now, President Muhammadu Buhari Sunday joined Obiang Nguema Baseko of Equatorial Guinea, Abiy Ahmed, Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and other African leaders to inaugurate the headquarters of the Committee on Intelligence and Security Services in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with a pledge to intensify security cooperation. The side event took place on the margins of the 33rd EU Summit, and the office complex is donated by the Republic of Equatorial Guinea. The chairperson of CISA and Director General of National Intelligence Agency of Nigeria, Ambassador Ahmed Rufai Abubakar, described the building as a product of vision, generosity, partnership, and African solidarity. He thanked President Teodoro Obiang Nguema of Equatorial Guinea for his generosity and the Prime Minister and government of Ethiopia for providing the land on which the project is situated. CISA chairperson also expressed gratitude to the African Union Commission chairperson Moussa Faki for his interest in the committee's work and encouragement. The decision to establish CISA was made on 26 August 2004 in Abuja, Nigeria, by heads of intelligence and security services of Africa. CISA's mandate is to provide the African Union Commission and its member services with timely and insightful intelligence which would assist them in making informed decisions. It is also a platform where member services exchange intelligence expertise and experience while dealing with common threats that affect the continent. Now, the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada met with President Muhammadu Buhari today on the margins of the 33rd African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. The report.
The Prime Minister spoke about the importance of Nigeria, Africa's largest economy and the most populous country, as a bilateral and regional partner for Canada. The two leaders discussed the growing numbers of Canada and Nigerian companies during business together, with opportunities to do more in sectors related in technology, education, infrastructure, and information and telecommunication technology. The Prime Minister expressed concern over humanitarian situation in northeastern part of Nigeria and the plight of the civilian population affected by ongoing insecurity in the Lake Chad Basin. The Prime Minister and the President spoke about innovative climate action and collaboration to address the devastating environmental degradation affected with climate change. The two leaders agreed to continue working together to strengthen cooperation on trade and investment, peace and security, and climate change.
All right, this is the news at 7 on NTA International. We'll take a break now. News returns in just a moment. Stay with us. Many thanks for being there. Next is the World in 6 Days segment of the news, and Uche Ugochukwu is our guide.
A warm welcome. Let's begin with the ongoing African Union Summit, which dedicated the year 2020 for accelerating action and efforts towards ending all wars, civil conflicts, gender-based violence, and prevention of genocide. The AU Summit is also emphasizing the role of African women and girls in the implementation of the master plan to silence the guns in Africa. We will bring you up to speed on this on our next package. Moving on now, the Pietermaritzburg High Court issued a warrant of arrest for South Africa's former President Jacob Zuma after he missed a scheduled court appearance. Mr. Zuma, who has been charged with a string of crimes, including corruption, racketeering, and money laundering, was expected at the pre-trial hearing on Tuesday, but was not present due to bad health, according to his lawyers. Malawi's Constitutional Court annulled its presidential election results 7 months later and ruled Peter Mutharika was unduly elected president. President Mutharika was declared winner for a second term with 1.9 million votes, representing 38.57%, which the judgment ruled did not meet the majority votes as stipulated in Section 80, which requires 50 plus 1 of total votes in terms of several candidates contesting. The court also ruled that fresh elections be held within 150 days. United States Senate on Wednesday acquitted President Donald Trump on 2 articles of impeachment, rejecting the House's charges that he should be removed from office for abusing power and obstructing the congressional investigation into his conduct. Chief Justice John Roberts' announcement of the result on each article of impeachment brought the 3-week trial to a close. In another news, Boris Johnson set out his vision for a trade deal with the EU, saying there is no need for the UK to follow Brussels rules. The Prime Minister canvassed for Canada-style free trade deal, saying the UK would return to the withdrawal agreement if such a deal was not reached. Israel began to draw up maps of land in the occupied West Bank that will be annexed in accordance with U.S. President Donald Trump's proposed peace plan. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the area would include all Israeli settlements and the Jordan Valley, a territory Israel has kept under military occupation since its capture in the 1967 Middle East War, but which Palestinians want in a future state. Prospects for annexation, which have already been widely condemned, are still unclear. Coming after more than 3 decades, the U.S. invited head of Sudan's governing body, Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, to Washington to discuss ways of developing bilateral ties. Diplomatic ties between the U.S. and Sudan has improved since former President Omar al-Bashir was toppled last year. In a similar development, Kenya and the U.S. have started negotiations that are expected to lead to a trade agreement between the two countries. President Uhuru Kenyatta met President Donald Trump at the White House, where they agreed to initiate the talks. Analysts say Trump's administration is keen to pursue bilateral deals with African countries instead of the multilateral African deal, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which has governed trade for the past 20 years and will continue until 2025. Turning attention to the coronavirus outbreak, the death toll has overtaken that of the SARS epidemic in 2003. Health officials in Hubei reported 81 new cases on Saturday, bringing the death toll in the region to 780. And sadly, the Chinese doctor who had been reprimanded for issuing an early warning about coronavirus died after contracting the virus while treating patients in Wuhan. Finally, Kenya's former president Daniel Arap Moi died at the age of 95. President Uhuru Kenyatta, who announced his death, said the nation lost a great man. Mr. Moi was Kenya's longest-serving president. He was in office for 24 years until intense pressure forced him to step down in 2002. His critics saw him as an authoritarian ruler who oversaw rampant corruption, but his allies credited him for maintaining stability in the country. That's the world in 6 days. I am Uche Ugachukwu. Thanks for being a part of it.
Many thanks, Uche. Now, following sustained mop-up operations by police operatives at the operational base of the Ansaru terrorist group in Kuduru Forest, Birnin-Gwari, 3 more members of the Ansaru terror group have been arrested. Now, this brings the number of persons arrested so far to 8, and the suspects are already assisting police investigators with useful information relating to the membership spread and makeup, criminal operational records, logistics, and general modus operandi of the terror group. A statement by Force Public Relations Officer Frank Mba says preliminary investigation reveals that the arrested suspects are involved in the recent attack and attempted kidnap of the Emir of Potiskum that resulted in the gruesome killing of Emir's police escort. They were also involved in several other kidnap operations and terror attacks on commuters and other innocent citizens along some major highways, especially in the northwest and north-central states of the country. Police investigation also reveals that some citizens, especially those within the business community, support the terror groups by doing businesses with them through the supply of essential goods, drugs, and other services. This statement calls for a patriotism amongst the people, noting that this is the only way the fight against the criminal elements can truly be won. Now, for a decade now, the Nigerian military has been battling terrorists in the northeast region and has succeeded in degrading these insurgents and regaining control of all territories that were hitherto under their control. The Acting General, Officer Commanding 7th Division Nigerian Army, Brigadier General Abdul Khalifa Ibrahim, however, says fighting terrorism requires a multifaceted approach from both the military and civil society. Defense correspondent Ismail Musa is part of the media team currently on tour of the region.
These are journalists assessing military efforts to end all forms of terrorism in the region. From Maiduguri-Bama Road to Banki Junction, Pulka, Limankara, Goza in Borno, and Madagali in Adamawa State meander through difficult terrain and harsh weather conditions, noting the features that provided safe haven for the insurgents, all now manned by the Nigerian Army troops. While socio-economic activities have resumed in many towns visited, some villages seem deserted, with buildings wearing old bullet wounds, structures torn rubble and scraps.
We are in Limankara. Behind me you can see the bridge. The bridge was blown off by the Boko Haram as they were withdrawing when the military were pushing them out early 2015. And you can see there is some work ongoing to reconstruct the bridge.
To the journalists on board, passing through parts of the demystified Sambisa forest, now a shadow of the former command and control center of the Boko Haram, it is obvious that the days of terror is still hibernating and numbered.
Although people are back to some of the communities going about their normal activities, but there's still more that needs to be done in terms of development. The roads are terrible. That's one thing that I have noticed, and it's not far from the fact that even governments will not be able to do much when there is crisis situation.
More importantly, I've seen a military that is up to its task, protecting the civilian population and assisting through other corporate social responsibilities.
Vast ungoverned space with enhanced ecosystem suitable for agriculture, a blessing to the Northeast, but also a challenge to the nation's military in view of the ongoing counter-insurgency operation and the area's proximity to countries like Chad and Niger. This paved way for possible cross-border crime.
Anywhere we are not is due to scarceness of military resources, which is very scarce even in US, and vastness of the ground. If we are to go and sit all over everywhere, we will almost have to triple our strength.
The media tour is expected to cover other parts of the country with military presence. From Maiduguri, the Borno State capital, Ismail Musa, NTA News.
And that report wraps up the news at 7 on NTA International. Many thanks for watching. I'm Chimobi Walton Naji. Good evening.